So, good morning. It's quite hard to keep up with all the Tory on Tory attacks now, isn't it? So, the latest one, as I'm sure you're aware, is Michelle Mone's criminal investigation. It's worth just going over exactly how this is panned out because it's taken an incredibly long time. So, in terms of what is now absolutely known without any doubt, because even Michelle Mone and her husband, Doug Barrowman, are admitting it, is that in 2020, they set up a company called PPE MedPro. Didn't exist before. Didn't exist. It was set up in the spring of 2020. And it was worth nothing, of course, had no assets, but received £203 million worth of government contracts for PPE. Now, it was two contracts. One of them, as far as I know, was fulfilled according to order, although with a huge profit margin. And the other one for surgical gowns was not. Now, they did hand over surgical gowns, but the NHS could not use them because they were not sterile. And that is where there's an area of contention because Mone and Barrowman insist that they were delivered as ordered. The NHS say not, the government say not. So there is a criminal investigation. It's very difficult to know exactly what the criminal investigation is for. I know a lot of us will sort of think, well, it's like fraud, isn't it? And, you know, it must be something like that. But I don't know the specific charges because there aren't any charges yet. I found out about the investigation at the start of 2022. Then in April 2022, they had homes and offices raided by the National Crime Agency. And then it all sort of went a bit quiet. Mone and Barrowman were denying any involvement in PPE MedPro, even though, like, lots of investigative journalists and others had gone, yeah, you absolutely are in charge of this company. They've now admitted that actually they were. So they've admitted their involvement in PPE MedPro now. And it's, it's... So they're now saying that, oh, sorry, we lied. We didn't mean to. But they've lied during about a matter about which they're being investigated for criminal purposes. So what I am guessing at the moment is that although the investigation, we can't see it really going anywhere because nothing's happening, it may well be that they're feeling the heat on this. My view says audio is a bit low. Sorry, the audio is whatever it is. I can't improve it anymore. My view on the situation is that Barrowman and Mone think they're in real trouble now. That's why they've started to admit a few things, because at the point at which it looks like you might end up in court, you certainly don't want to be telling obvious lies. Because then if you tell those same lies in court, that's perjury, right? In fact, in actual fact, I don't see why those same lies couldn't receive a charge of obstructing the course of justice or something similar anyway, because if they've lied to police about it or other investigators. But I think they feel the net closing. I think they're in trouble. And I think that is why they've done things like this interview and that promo video they did last week. I think it's about trying to get public support on their side. And why? Because the public don't matter in this. It's to try and get the Tories to call the attack dogs off. And you think to yourself, well, it's a criminal investigation, National Crime Agency, like the government don't direct it. But we do know that the government have. Theresa May, for example, after the Vote Leave campaign was found to have broken the law, it should have been the case that individuals investigate to see if any criminal law had been broken. And the National Crime Agency, it was known, strongly suspected, should we say, but basically known, that Theresa May at the time, who was Prime Minister, effectively sat on them, threatened their funding. Basically, the National Crime Agency were told that investigating any Brexit naughtiness was off limits. So we sort of know that the government are prepared to lean on supposedly independent institutions. They do it all the time. So Mone wants the government to sort of compel the National Crime Agency to find nothing in it, to close the investigation down, goes, oh, there's not enough evidence here type thing. And I also think that is why she's now trying to sling mud around. It's not like unfairly. See, Mone is claiming that she's a scapegoat. Now, she's not a scapegoat in the technical sense. Scapegoat is usually where you blame an innocent person. She's not innocent. At the same time, she is not the only one who's guilty. I mean, half of the contract can be said to have been not fulfilled. So that's like fraud to the tune of about 100 million. But there's been billions of pounds worth of PPE fraud that we know about, that the government accepts. Billions of pounds. So why is she the only one being investigated? And then the other point she's making is Rishi Sunak was saying how disappointed he was that it's turned out that she was lying. And she has said he knew about it all. He and Michael Gove knew everything was going on. And of course, this is obvious as well. In fact, Steph's saying of the Good Law Project taking the government to court over a number of these contracts, if I remember correctly. Does anyone in government actually get impacted anyway? No. Because it's the government that has broken the law. Individual ministers are only acting as agents of that government. It's the same as the Vote Leave campaign having found to have broken electoral law. No individual suffers from that unless there's a criminal investigation, but the criminal investigation was stopped. In this particular case, it might be that some of those ministers, Rishi Sunak, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, it may be that they have broken criminal law, but there'd have to be an investigation. It doesn't automatically follow because in a civil case for a judicial review in the High Court, the government's found to have broken the law. It doesn't automatically follow that an individual has broken criminal law. It may be. But we don't know if they're the only people being investigated. The police don't announce who they're investigating. No, but people tend to find out when they raid an office. If you're investigating someone for something like this, you want their records, you raid their office, you raid their home, as they did for Mone and Barrowman. That's not happened with anyone else. But I will say this. Labour insists that they're going after every penny of various types of fraud. In this case, PPE fraud as well as furlough fraud, right? They say they're going after every penny of the fraud. Now, we can trust that they mean it because, as people will keep saying, Labour are looking at a very bad balance sheet when they come into power. They know they can't just whack up the rate of tax. That would be ridiculous. It's already too high. They know that they can't just massively borrow, even though the Tories are borrowing. So they can't do that. So what they're going to have to do is find some other way. If they want every £1 billion they can find, some other way, is £1 billion they can invest, right? So yes, we can believe that Labour will go after the fraud because there's billions available. Now, they won't get it all. You never get it all. But they can get a fair amount of it. In order for that to happen, you would think there's going to be a lot more of these investigations. So I think there are going to be some more of these. And these investigations could end up being finding individual ministers to be ultimately responsible. Because what was the VIP lane? What was happening? At the moment, you'll notice Tories are worried about this. And I'll tell you how you're worried about it, how we know they're worried about it. There's Tory client journalists. I've seen Dan Hodges doing it a lot, but I've seen a few others as well. And they're saying, oh, it's all right saying Labour saying that we need a proper audit. They didn't call for an audit at the time, did they? No, it was Labour who were demanding the government get PPE at any cost and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, mate, that's not what happened. I'll tell you exactly what happened, right? We needed PPE. The Labour was saying, where's the PPE? Why haven't you got PPE? Why are people in hospitals? Why are people in care homes without PPE? And they're going to say, oh, it's a pandemic, or it's very difficult to get supplies, you know. And then... But they were asking, so why aren't the contracts being given out? There was a documentary, I think it was on the BBC, that was going around because another thing Dan Hodges is saying is all the producers were in China. No, they weren't. Suppliers all over the world. There's producers in Britain, in the UK, that supply PPE. And journalists were going around them and they were saying, we're making stuff for Germany, for the United States, for wherever. They were making stuff. And they said, these British-based producers of PPE, they said if they got NHS contracts, they would prioritise them. They'd do them first. and they weren't getting any. That's what Labour was saying. Why aren't you giving these contracts out? And the government said, oh, well, we have to do due diligence. It's like, these people have been supplying the NHS for a while. Why aren't you? You know that they're good. Why aren't you doing them? And we at the time, it was really confusing. I was confused. We now know what was happening. They put a stop on all awards of contracts to set up this, what they called the high priority lane, what we call the VIP lane, where mates of Tories or people who donated to the Tory party would get priority on being given these contracts. And this isn't normal corruption. Normally, the way the Tories do these things is, let's say they need to give out a contract for something, goods or services, right? And you've got two companies and they're both capable, they both present a feasible plan, but one of them donated 20 grand to the health secretary, say. Well, you give them the contract. It's nothing to do with which one's going to do it best. The one that donated to the Tories gets it, right? Now, this was beyond that. This was giving it to people who knew nothing about PPE. Michelle Mone sells underwear, right? And you might ask yourself, why is the focus on Michelle Mone when actually her husband, Doug Barrowman, ran the show and he got the most of the money? It was £67 million profit, right? She ended up with, I think, 27 million of that, and actually that was for her and her children. So Doug Barrowman took the lion's share of this money, and he's the one who set up the company, and he's the one who ran the company. So why isn't he mostly in the frame? Because it was Michelle Mone, as a Tory peer, close to the Tories, who got the contract. She was the insider, right, who got the contract. That's why the focus is on her. She's a Tory politician who used her position as a Tory politician to get the contract. Doug Barrowman just sorted out the business side of it. So it's that's the situation. That's what happened. The government deliberately delayed handing out contracts because they saw a way to reward themselves, their friends, and their donors. So they delayed that, which meant it took a long time to get PPE in. That would have meant we need the PPE to protect people. That would have meant that people weren't protected for longer. Inevitably, that means as a result of that, some extra people would have died. Some extra people would have contracted COVID and now have long COVID, as many nurses, for example, do, as many care workers do. And also, when it did come in, because not all of it was what was ordered, because they weren't going, they were basically giving a load of money to people who knew nothing. It's like, imagine giving it to you. Imagine the government give you 203 million quid to source about 140 million quid's worth of equipment. And what you're going to do? You're just going to ring around some business that deals with it. You're going to go yourself. You're like a middleman. You're going to go and ring around businesses that can supply it on this scale from China and arrange it. And you're being paid so much money that you can afford, as long as you've got the seed money to be able to do it, that's what you're going to do. And, but yeah, but Michelle Mone and Doug Barrowman are obviously now of the view, I think, because it doesn't make, if they thought the investigation was going nowhere, because they haven't piped up before, have they? They've only just, this is in the last couple of weeks that they've started piping up. I think they're getting the impression from their lawyers that they're in real trouble now. It's like, it wouldn't surprise me if charges are coming in the not too distant future. And I think their lawyers are saying that they're not going to dodge those charges. So I think they're trying to muddy the water to make it as awkward as possible, so that I think what their plan will be to make it so politically damaging, especially in an election year, that Rishi Sunak leans on the National Crime Agency to sort of drop it. I think that's the plan, because she's heavily implicating Sunak, particularly, by saying that he knew everything that was going on, because that then invites another investigation, doesn't it? Because that invites people to say, well, hang on a minute, if I'm guilty of anything, why isn't Rishi Sunak guilty of something? Who was the Chancellor at the time signing the cheques? Why isn't Michael Gove guilty of something, who ran the Cabinet Office, who ran the VIP lane? You know, why aren't those people in the frame? But there it is. People talking about dentists now. So dentists have been in the news as well, in terms of you can't get one. Interestingly, if I have a dentist appointment today, I have to rush off after this, make sure my videos, the first couple of videos are done, and then off ski. But the dentist I have is not local. I managed to get a dentist. So I had a dentist when I was growing up in Doncaster. And then when I moved to Grimsby, couldn't get a dentist. No, that's it. No, when I moved to Grimsby, I carried on using the one in Doncaster because it's quite good. Then I moved to somewhere else and I got a dentist there, which is the one I still have. Now, I've moved twice since, but because where I've moved since I couldn't get one, I'm still with that one. So it's actually a bit of a drive away. It's like 45 minutes drive away. Steve Kirk, £10 super chat. Thank you very much. But yes, there are lots of stories at the moment about how just people cannot get dentists at all. And the dentist I have, I think this is quite normal now. It's subsidized. It's not like free. So I pay a fee, but it's for me, it's a relatively nominal fee. And there was a report out. This is what's getting a lot of attention in the news. There's a report out from a think tank suggesting that the situation with dentistry is now so bad that there is no rescuing it. It would just take an unfeasible amount of money to rescue it. So what's going to happen realistically, if you want to make sure that people can have access to dental treatment, is you're going to have to expand this idea of people almost effectively being means tested. So people contributing to dental care just for the sake of getting it, so that those on low incomes and the young and the old can carry on getting free treatment. But at the moment, there's lots of people can't get any treatment. I mean, my teeth are actually shocking anyway. But there we go. Sorry, we've hijacked the chat. No, this is fine. We talk about whatever after the main topic anyway. I think I've gone over. Just wanted to update what's going on with the Mone thing, because it could be a source of more blue on blue action in the new year, like in terms of fractures in the Tory party. Because the other thing is, I'm not convinced Mone and Barrowman are strategic geniuses, by the way. But at the same time, I don't just want to dismiss them as idiots. So if I assume that there is some strategy behind what they're doing, and I'll tell you what, that interview they did is not going to get the public on their side, because they basically came across as, well, we're fabulously wealthy. I mean, it's absolutely our right to become even more fabulously wealthy. What are you moaning about? We didn't do anything wrong. Oh, this £67 million profit, which represents a third of the total value of the contracts. It was £67 million profit of £203 million of public money. And they justified that profit as, well, we took a risk. It's like, what risk did you take? What risk did you take? You got a contract from the government. You could understand someone who gets a contract to supply equipment. You've got to pay money for that equipment because you don't get paid until you supply it, right? So you've got to shell out for that equipment. And let's say the person who gave you that contract then goes bust or something and they don't fulfill it and you're landed with all this stuff now. You've paid that money out. That's a risk. They didn't have a risk. There was zero risk that the government weren't going to pay them. In fact, the issue here is the government has paid them when they didn't even get the goods. And that's happened with so much. As I say, I keep coming back to the fact it's billions of pounds worth of PPE fraud. Was it between £4 and £5 billion of specifically PPE fraud? That's not. There's other fraud as well, COVID like furlough fraud, of PPE fraud, and her contribution to it, allegedly, because no one's been convicted of anything, is about 100 million, roughly 100. I can't remember exactly how it's split. It was £203 million for the two contracts. The government, the NCA only chased them over one. It's like they're satisfied with the other contract. But there we go. Where's she saying, charging people now just to stay on the books, the entire thing is a racket. Well, ultimately the situation is this. There is too few dentists in the country, which means, so if you're like a dentist and there's enough people in the country who can afford private treatment and will pay for private treatment, you get more money treating privately than you do as an NHS dentist, right? Now, just like doctors, the reason why you can still get a GP though is because the government know that if we had a shortage of GPs like we have a shortage of dentists, the public simply wouldn't put up with it. I don't actually know why the public are putting up with the sheer scale of the waits that you have to get for a GP appointment. But nonetheless, they're not going to put up with actually not having a GP at all. So that's the only reason. So they've made sure that there were just enough doctors. So even though GPs can have, you get some GPs that are private GPs, some that do a mix of private and NHS practice. But, you know, there's just about enough that you can have a GP, but not for a dentist. And that's really all there is to it. If you had more dentists, only so many of them can do private practice because there's only so many in the country can afford to pay for private dental treatment or to have a private dental plan. So, you know, that's ultimately where the issue is. We just need lots more dentists. And then some of them will have to do NHS treatment because it's like that or nothing. And it still pays well. It just doesn't pay as well as private practice. Ray Harvey, £10 super chat. Thank you very much indeed. What about the, so going back to the Mone and so on, what about the risk of them getting prosecuted later? Will nobody think of the peers? Well, there's a bit of an argument about even what sort of peer she is. So she took a leave of absence from the House of Lords to basically bugger off and hide on her yacht that she doesn't want people knowing about, even though it's named after her. It's named, she's got a yacht and she named it after herself. Anyway, the yeah, there's an argument. The Tories are saying that she's not a Tory peer. I saw the, in fact, it was quite interesting because when I was reading a story about it in The Guardian, where was it now? Yeah, it says there's a few stories about it, as you can imagine, but there's this particular one. It said Michelle Mone and ministers trade claims over her hidden links to PPE deals. And then the underneath that, disgraced Tory peer. And I thought when I read that yesterday, I think it was yesterday, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Last night, I thought to myself, she's not a Tory peer because she's, we're told she's not even in the Conservative Party now. But I thought when she took her leave from the House of Lords, she also had the Tory whip removed. And the Tories are insisting that that was the case. But the House of Lords themselves say, no, she's still classified as a Tory MP, which is really weird. That's really odd, because it says here, Mone remains a Tory peer according to the House of Lords, despite number 10 claiming she had de facto lost the whip because she'd taken a leave of absence when the scandal broke. So de facto suggests to me that there was no I don't really know. Is there a mechanism to remove the whip from a peer? There should be, surely. But there it is anyway. You know, apparently she is still officially a Tory peer, and maybe there's nothing Rishi Sunak can do about it. It's, you know, Tories should maybe choose their peers a bit more carefully, perhaps. John's putting in there, the Miriam Cates under investigation, can we guess for what? It may be nothing at all. I wouldn't worry about the Miriam Cates thing. I got a bit excited about it, and I think I got the impression from someone it's actually something very dull and boring. And do bear in mind, so for those who don't know, Miriam Cates, who's a little bit of a star of the far right of the Tory party, even though she's an idiot, is under investigation by the Standards Committee. MPs are investigated by the Standards Committee all the time. The reason why we don't know what it's about is because the committee don't investigate, or they don't announce what they're investigating until it's over. Because if it ends up being nothing at all, and you can end up being investigated just because a lot of people make a complaint about something, and it might be politically motivated. So it's like a sort of fairness thing that, because, you know, if you're being investigated for something, even if you found like there's no case to answer, you can sometimes have the mud stick unfairly. You know, people will say, oh, but they were investigated for them. There's no smoke without fire, even though it's easy to make smoke without fire. But it's, has anyone ever tried cooking a steak? But that's, you know, so they do that. So they say, they won't say what it's about until it's sort of over. But I strongly suspect not. Is she still getting paid as a peer? No, peers don't actually get paid, really. They get attendance fees. So you only get paid for the days you attend. Even though you don't have to do anything when you attend, you just have to physically be in the building. That's it. You can be in the tea rooms, as far as I know, and you still get your money. But you do only get it for attending. It's not like being an MP. So there's no salary for being a peer as such. It's an attendance fee. So she's not been to the House of Lords for a long time, she certainly won't be getting that money now. But it is quite interesting that next year, if you again, all this talk about an autumn general election, and you can't rule it out. And I can believe that Rishi Sunak wants an autumn general election. I can totally believe that, but I just don't see how it's feasible. It'd be really interesting next year because you've got, although the rebellion on the far right of the party trying to bring Sunak down doesn't look like it's terribly organised at the moment, it's still there. And the longer next year goes on, like the Tories are sort of hoping that things pick up next year. I really don't think they're going to. When you look at the things that are if you look at the reasons why their polling is as it is now, none of that changes next year, and there's some extra ones thrown in. Some of them think that their dirty campaign tactics are going to work out. For example, there's a law passing through Parliament at the moment. At the moment, you are protected. You have data protections that stop political parties ramming you with unsolicited messages, right? Unless you have given them express permission to email you. Like I get emails from Labour, but I don't get emails from the Lib Dems or the Conservatives because I've not given them permission to. Even though sometimes I think I should, just to see what they're saying. But sometimes people email me with what they're saying anyway. But that's like, but they're putting a law through Parliament that will allow for political purposes the ability to spam you with text messages, emails, all sorts, for political purposes without your permission. And you'll have no way of withdrawing your permission. It's an absolute nonsense. Yeah, Patrick said about £300 per day or something for attending the lodge. It's about that. I don't know whether it's gone up recently, but these things usually do. I know MPs are on for a £6,000 pay rise next year. So I imagine peers get an increase in their attendance fee as well. Where did all the test and trace money go? Dodgy contracts there too. Inevitably, I'll tell you where a lot of it will have gone. Again, we haven't seen the full audit on this. For a start, we didn't get any benefit from it. Parliament said that system did not work. It didn't actually improve it. It's like we could have saved all those tens of billions, and it would have made no difference. They're not saying a track and trace system wouldn't have made a difference. They're saying the one we had didn't. Right? So it was wasted. What was it spent on? Famously, not on the people running the system. They were minimum wage with 2-page PDF training. But very famously, we were spending a lot of money a day on consultants. And you think, and it was a ridiculous amount of money. Some of these consultants were getting, what was it? Something stupid, £1,000 a day or something. Was it several? In fact, some of them might have been several £1,000s a day. But they were spending an awful lot on consultants. And you think to yourself, well, the consultant, given that the system didn't work at all, it's like it was literally not even better than nothing. It was just more expensive than nothing. What were these consultants doing? So that will have been a dodge. I will absolutely bet you. How can you spend as much as they were spending on consultancy fees and not actually come up with a vaguely working system? Even if it wasn't in the end world beating. How could it not actually do anything of any value if you're spending that? So a lot of the money would have gone on that. A lot of the money also went on, yes, private companies carrying out various services. Like, for example, the private companies that were paid to organise it, they will have made lots of money. The workers running it, the workers on the phones wouldn't have done. They were minimum wage. But the actual companies it went to would have made out like bandits. £5 super chat from Di. It says, sorry to stereotype, but some black pudding for Christmas dinner. So people talk about Christmas dinners as well. Can't keep up. 8,000 pounds is it for the MP's salary going up? Okay, is it? I thought it was 6,000. Either way, it's going up by quite a lot when you consider that they've been very, very tight with other. My attitude is I have no issue with MPs being paid properly. I actually think they should be paid more because then there can be no argument about them needing second jobs, right? Pay them. And it wouldn't add very much to the public purse. But I will say this. When it comes to deciding percentage increases in pay rates, MPs are public servants, just like any other public servant. If you've got a scale, they should be at the bottom. It should be at the bottom. MPs, there should not be any type of public worker that receives a smaller percentage pay increase than MPs. So I think MPs should lead by example, and you might have a system where everyone in the public sector gets, say, a 4% pay increase in a particular year. But in reality, they don't. It's a scale, right? So if you look at that scale, so what are the various percentage pay increases across the public sector? If the lowest of them is, say, 2%, MP should get a 2% pay increase. If the lowest of them is 0%, MP should get a 0% pay increase. It should really be that. Lead by example. Lead by example. They should have the joint, should we say, the joint smallest percentage based of pay increase. That way, they might be a bit keener to make sure public workers are paid properly, might they? If they want their own pay increase, they can make sure everyone else gets it first. That's what I would say of MPs. And I would make that law. I would actually set that down in law. I'd actually try and if you were going to have a codified constitution, I would put that in it as well. In fact, Chris will say many consultants were on £4,000 a day. Well, there we go. And that is where an awful lot of that money went. It went on consultancy fees. Let's see if we can just find really quickly, because we're sort of running out of time. The thing is, though, I don't think there's been proper audits done yet. I'm not going to find it, am I? But there are various reports saying that it was spending over £1 million a day on consultants. So that will be, it may not be like where all of that billions of pounds of waste went, but it will be where a good chunk of it was utterly, completely wasted. But there we go. It's a very long time since MPs led by example. Well, indeed. I mean, politicians, not necessarily unfairly, are a poorly thought of bunch anyway. But, I mean, it's quite interesting because there was some survey came out recently where they were comparing, well, they do these surveys all the time. And trust in politicians was actually at a peak when Labour were in power. And it is now at a record low. I mean, that just tells you everything. So it will be quite interesting. I mean, Labour's job in government, apart from anything, there'll be lots of ways in which they try and make sure they can stay in government. And one of them is going to be rebuilding trust in politics. But there we go. MPs think of themselves as CEOs of the country, despite the fact they'll do little more than a civil servant. They don't even do that because they can do what they like. I mean, they can take Jacob Rees-Mogg famously, when Parliament was sitting, he just took himself off for the cricket. Oh, I'm going to have to watch the cricket this afternoon. And it's like, well, you couldn't do that. He was the one who was moaning that people weren't at their desks. I mean, they were working. They were working from home. He was complaining they should have done it at their desks. And yet he could just take himself off. When Parliament's sitting, when Parliament is in session and it's a sitting day, he's supposed to be, if he's not in his constituency, he's supposed to be in Parliament, and he just took himself off to watch the cricket. So he wasn't in his constituency or Parliament. And they can do that. So they're not like civil servants. Their job is basically to sit in meetings and make decisions. That's it. They don't do anything. But there we go. Have fun at the dentist. I hate dentists. I absolutely hate dentists. It's probably why my teeth are so bad, because I only go when I need to, which is really, really silly. But there we go anyway. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. We will Graham will catch up again tomorrow. Parliament actually goes into recess today, so there won't be any PMQs tomorrow, just to remind you. They're in recess now for several weeks, so we're going to have to get all our drama from the media. It looks like Michelle Mone is going to provide some of it. But have a very good day, everyone, and until next time, I'll see you later.